On January 30th, 2026, the United States Department of Justice released over 3 million pages of documents, files that had been locked away for years. Files that powerful people never wanted you to see. What was hidden in those documents? Why did it take so long? And most importantly, is this really the complete truth? This is the full story of Jeffrey Epstein, the man who built an empire of wealth, power, and unspeakable crimes. The documents that were just released could change everything we thought we knew. But they also raise the most dangerous questions of all. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear will shock you. To understand why these documents matter, we first need to understand who Jeffrey Epstein was. And that story begins long before his arrest. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born on January 20th, 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. He came from a middle-class family. Nothing about his early life suggested what he would become. He was a college dropout. He never graduated from university, but he was brilliant, charismatic, and dangerously ambitious. In the 1970s, Epstein began his career as a teacher at the Dalton School, an elite private school in Manhattan. But teaching wasn't enough for him. He wanted wealth. He wanted power. And he knew how to get it. By the early 1980s, Epstein had entered the world of high finance. He worked at Bear Stearns, one of Wall Street's most prestigious firms, but he didn't stay there long. In 1982, he left to form his own financial management company, and this is where the mystery deepens. Epstein claimed to manage money only for billionaires, clients with at least $1 billion. But nobody could verify exactly who these clients were, or how Epstein became so extraordinarily wealthy himself. According to reports, Epstein was worth approximately $600 million when he died in 2019. But even today, financial experts struggle to explain how he made that fortune. A recent investigation by the New York Times in December 2025 revealed that Epstein's wealth may have come from questionable financial schemes, rather than legitimate investment management. But the full truth remains unclear. What we do know is that Epstein used his wealth to build something far more sinister. He cultivated relationships with some of the most powerful people in the world: former presidents, British royalty, technology billionaires, Hollywood celebrities, legal experts, scientists. He hosted them at his private island in the Caribbean. He flew them on his private Boeing 727 jet, which victims later called the Lolita Express. He entertained them at his mansions in Manhattan, Palm Beach, New Mexico, and Paris. But beneath this glamorous surface was a horrifying reality. Epstein was a serial predator, a sex offender, a human trafficker. For more than 2 decades, from the late 1990s through 2019, Epstein sexually abused dozens, perhaps hundreds of underage girls. Many were as young as 14 years old. He recruited them through a calculated system. Young girls from vulnerable backgrounds were approached, often at schools or shopping malls. They were promised money for giving massages. But those massages quickly turned into sexual abuse, and Epstein didn't act alone. Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of media tycoon Robert Maxwell, became Epstein's closest associate. Prosecutors later proved that Maxwell helped recruit, groom, and abuse victims. She was convicted in December 2021 and is currently serving a 20-year prison sentence. But the most shocking part of Epstein's story is what happened when law enforcement first caught him. In 2005, parents of a 14-year-old girl in Palm Beach, Florida, reported Epstein to police. An investigation began. The FBI got involved. Prosecutors gathered evidence of serial abuse involving dozens of girls. By 2007, federal prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida had drafted a 60-count indictment against Epstein and 3 unnamed co-conspirators. The charges included sex trafficking of minors. If convicted, Epstein could have faced life in prison, but that indictment was never filed. Instead, in 2008, then U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta negotiated what many have called one of the most controversial plea deals in American legal history. Epstein pleaded guilty to just 2 state prostitution charges. He served only 13 months in a private wing of a county jail, where he was allowed to leave for work release 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The federal charges disappeared. The victims were never notified about the deal, which violated federal law. And most shockingly, Epstein and any potential co-conspirators received immunity from all federal charges. This deal haunted Epstein's case for years. In 2020, the Department of Justice reviewed Acosta's conduct and found that he had used poor judgment, but did not engage in professional misconduct. Many disagreed with that conclusion. After his release, Epstein continued his life as if nothing had happened. He maintained his properties, his jet, his connections to the powerful elite. Until July 6, 2019. That day, FBI agents arrested Epstein at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey as he returned from Paris. This time, federal prosecutors in New York charged him with sex trafficking of minors. The evidence was overwhelming, but Epstein would never face trial. On August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. The medical examiner ruled his death a suicide by hanging. His death immediately sparked conspiracy theories and widespread suspicion. How could one of the highest-profile prisoners in America die in federal custody? Were the guards truly asleep? Why were the security cameras malfunctioning? A 2023 Department of Justice report found serious failures by federal prison staff. 2 guards admitted to falsifying records. But the official conclusion remained: Epstein died by suicide. Epstein's death meant that many questions would never be answered in court. But it also meant that the documents related to his case, his victims, and his connections to powerful people became the only remaining source of truth. And those documents were about to be revealed. For years, victims, journalists, and members of Congress demanded transparency. They wanted to know what the FBI and Department of Justice had found during their investigations into Jeffrey Epstein. But those files remained sealed, hidden from public view, until Congress decided to act. In July 2025, the U.S. House of Representatives introduced House Resolution 4405, known as the Epstein Files Transparency Act. The bill had bipartisan support, a rare occurrence in today's divided political climate. The message was clear: the American people deserved to know the truth. On November 19, 2025, President Donald Trump signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act into law. The act directed the Department of Justice to produce, with very few exceptions, all documents, files, records, videos, and images related to the investigations and prosecutions of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. There was a deadline, December 19, 2025, but that deadline came and went. The Department of Justice said it needed more time to review millions of pages of material. Critics accused the government of delay tactics and cover-ups. Finally, on January 30, 2026, more than 40 days past the original deadline, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche held a press conference. The DOJ announced it was releasing over 3.5 million pages of documents, along with thousands of videos and photographs. This was, by far, the largest release of Epstein-related materials ever made public. According to the Department of Justice, more than 500 attorneys and legal reviewers worked on processing these files. 40 specialized attorneys conducted detailed reviews to redact sensitive information, particularly anything that could identify victims. The DOJ stated that this release fulfilled their legal obligation under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. They claimed this would be the final release. Deputy Attorney General Blanche emphasized during the press conference that the White House had no oversight of the review process. He also acknowledged that the files may include fake or falsely submitted images, documents, or videos, since everything sent to the FBI by the public was included in the release. Within hours of the release, reporters, researchers, and the public began downloading and analyzing the documents. What they found was both explosive and deeply disturbing. But they also found something else: major problems with redactions, missing information, and more questions than answers. Let's be very clear about what was actually in these documents, because separating fact from speculation is crucial. First, the documents included a massive volume of FBI investigation files, known as 302s. These are interview notes taken by FBI agents when they speak with witnesses and victims. The 302s contained heartbreaking accounts from survivors. One victim told the FBI that she had confided in Epstein about being molested as a child. Instead of showing compassion, Epstein later sexually abused her himself when she was around 14 years old. Another document described how a victim was presented to a powerful individual at a party, with Ghislaine Maxwell making it clear the victim was available. The victim described feeling degraded and manipulated. The documents also revealed a draft federal indictment from the mid-2000s. This unsigned indictment would have charged Jeffrey Epstein and 3 unnamed co-conspirators with conspiracy to procure females under the age of 18 for lewd conduct. The indictment detailed horrific abuse of 19 girls, identified only as Jane Does, ranging in age from 14 to 17. It described a systematic pattern. The girls would be called to travel to Epstein's Palm Beach mansion. They would be paid several $100s. And they were often asked to recruit their friends into the same system. But that indictment was never filed. Instead, as we discussed, Epstein received his controversial plea deal in 2008. The documents also included thousands of emails between Epstein and members of the elite. There were email exchanges between Epstein and Larry Summers, former U.S. Treasury Secretary and Harvard University president. In these emails, they discussed political figures, with Epstein claiming certain individuals didn't understand how dumb some people in power really were. There were emails between Epstein and Howard Lutnick, now the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. These emails showed Lutnick sought to meet with Epstein multiple times between 2011 and 2012, despite Lutnick's previous public claims that he avoided Epstein after 2005. There were emails between Epstein and Kathy Rumler, a former White House counsel under President Barack Obama and now the chief legal officer at Goldman Sachs. In one exchange, Rumler called Epstein Wonderful Jeffrey and said, "I adore him." The emails appeared to show Epstein arranging and paying for her international travel. There were also emails involving billionaire Elon Musk. Despite Musk's previous claims that he refused offers to visit Epstein's private island, the documents show Musk attempted to coordinate multiple visits in 2012 and 2013. In one email, Musk asked Epstein which day or night on the island would be the wildest party. It's not clear from the emails whether Musk ultimately visited the island. There were also documents involving Steve Tisch, co-owner of the New York Giants. Emails showed Tisch asking Epstein for help connecting him with women, with Epstein describing potential introductions in crude detail. Tisch later stated he deeply regrets any association with Epstein. Critically, the documents included flight logs from Epstein's private jets. These logs showed numerous trips involving powerful individuals. Former President Bill Clinton's name appeared repeatedly, though Clinton has stated he cut ties with Epstein before 2006 and was never aware of his crimes. Former President Donald Trump's name appeared thousands of times throughout the documents, including in unverified FBI complaint forms submitted by members of the public. The Department of Justice emphasized that many of these submissions were unverified and potentially false. The documents also included detailed records about Epstein's relationship with Prince Andrew, Duke of York. One FBI memo described a victim stating that Ghislaine Maxwell once presented her to Trump and suggested she was available, though the victim said nothing ultimately happened. Similar accounts involved other powerful figures. There were financial records related to Ghislaine Maxwell, including banking documents showing substantial account balances and wire transfers. There were booking photos of Maxwell from her arrest, along with images of her New Hampshire property from FBI search warrants. There were also previously unseen photographs of Epstein's private Caribbean island, Little St. James, showing bedrooms and other areas where abuse allegedly occurred. And there was one particularly disturbing document, an FBI diagram labeled as Epstein's co-conspirators. The diagram showed photos and names of several individuals close to Epstein, including Ghislaine Maxwell, employees, pilots, and associates. But 5 names and photos were completely redacted. 5 people identified by the FBI as potential co-conspirators whose identities remain hidden. Let me be absolutely clear about something important. Being mentioned in these documents does not mean someone committed a crime. Many people had legitimate professional or social interactions with Epstein before his criminal behavior was widely known. But the documents do raise serious questions about who knew what and when they knew it. Even before the documents were fully analyzed, major controversies erupted. The first and most serious problem: the documents exposed victims' identities. Despite the Department of Justice's promises to protect victim privacy, dozens of survivors found their real names unredacted throughout the files. One woman, referred to in legal proceedings as Jane Doe, found her actual name appearing multiple times, including in email exchanges she had previously had with Epstein. Her lawyer, Jennifer Plotkin, had contacted the DOJ before the release asking them to fix this problem. She never received a response. Within hours of the release, survivors began reporting that their personal information, names, locations, and details about their abuse, was fully visible to the public. Attorneys for victims wrote to federal judges, describing the release as appalling and traumatizing. They noted that while powerful men's names were heavily redacted, victims' names were left exposed. On February 2, 2026, just days after the release, victims' lawyers asked a federal judge to order the Department of Justice to shut down its Epstein Files website. They argued that the botched redactions had damaged the lives of nearly 100 victims. The DOJ responded by taking down several thousand documents that mistakenly contained victim information. But the damage was already done. The files had been downloaded by thousands of people worldwide. The second major controversy: the inconsistency of redactions. Throughout the documents, redactions appeared random. Some powerful people's names were completely hidden, others were left fully visible. For example, the draft indictment from the 2000s showed 3 unnamed co-conspirators with their identities completely redacted. To this day, we don't know who they are or why they were never charged. Yet in other documents, the names of individuals who were never accused of crimes appeared unredacted. Critics argued that the DOJ's redaction process protected the powerful while exposing the vulnerable. The third controversy: what's still missing. Despite the release of over 3.5 million pages, the Department of Justice admitted that approximately 200,000 additional pages were redacted or withheld based on various privileges. These privileges included attorney-client privilege, deliberative process privilege, and other legal protections. The DOJ also stated it is still trying to obtain grand jury materials from a federal criminal case involving corrections officers at the prison where Epstein died. Those materials have not been released. Furthermore, documents in foreign languages and files that could not be uploaded due to technical issues were also not produced. So when the Department of Justice says this is the final release, many question whether that's actually true. The fourth controversy: congressional response. Within days of the release, members of Congress from both parties expressed frustration. Representative Jamie Raskin, ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, requested a review of all unredacted Epstein files still in the DOJ's possession. He questioned whether the redactions truly complied with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Meanwhile, the House Oversight Committee has been conducting its own investigation. In a dramatic development, on February 2, 2026, former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton agreed to testify before Congress about their connections to Epstein. This came just hours before the House was scheduled to vote on holding them in contempt of Congress for previously refusing to comply with subpoenas. The Clintons have repeatedly stated they had no knowledge of Epstein's crimes. Bill Clinton's spokesperson has said the former president cut ties with Epstein before 2006. But the volume of references to Clinton in the documents has intensified calls for his testimony. The fifth controversy: the impact on ongoing cases. Several civil lawsuits by Epstein victims are still pending. Victims' attorneys argue that the document release, particularly the exposure of victims' identities, has compromised their ability to seek justice. Some survivors have said they will no longer cooperate with investigations because they no longer trust the government to protect them. And finally, The sixth controversy, the political implications. The Epstein case has become deeply politicized. Both Democrats and Republicans have accused each other of attempting to weaponize the documents for partisan purposes. Some claim the delays in release were designed to protect certain political figures. Others argue that the documents have been selectively leaked to damage reputations. In this environment, finding objective truth has become extraordinarily difficult. So after everything we've learned after 3.5 million pages of documents, what questions remain? First, has the full truth really come out? The Department of Justice says yes. They claim they have fulfilled their legal obligation under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. But consider this, 200,000 pages are still withheld. Grand jury materials haven't been released. Documents in foreign languages weren't included. Technical issues prevented some files from being uploaded. And most crucially, the FBI's diagram showing Epstein's potential co-conspirators still has 5 names completely redacted. Second, whose names are still being withheld and why. The draft indictment from the 2000s identified 3 unnamed co-conspirators. They were described as helping Epstein procure females under the age of 18. Yet we still don't know who they are. Were they ever questioned? Were they granted immunity under Epstein's 2008 plea deal? Are they still alive? The public deserves answers. Third, will more documents be released in the future? The DOJ says this was the final release, but Congress has the power to demand more. The Epstein Files Transparency Act requires the DOJ to submit a formal report to Congress within 15 days of the January 30th release. That report must include a list of all government officials and politically exposed persons found in the files, along with a summary of all redactions. If that report reveals significant withheld information, Congress could pass additional legislation demanding further releases. Fourth, could any powerful figures face legal consequences? This is perhaps the most important question. Being mentioned in the documents is not the same as being charged with a crime. Most individuals who interacted with Epstein did so before his criminal behavior was publicly known, and many had legitimate professional or social reasons for those interactions. However, if the documents reveal evidence of criminal conduct, particularly involvement in sex trafficking or abuse of minors, federal prosecutors could potentially bring charges. But here's the complication. Epstein's 2008 non-prosecution agreement granted immunity to his potential co-conspirators. Legal experts have debated for years whether that immunity is still valid and who exactly it covers. Some victims have tried to challenge that agreement in court, arguing it was illegally negotiated. Those legal battles continue. Fifth, what about accountability for the failures in Epstein's 2008 case? Alexander Acosta, the U.S. attorney who negotiated Epstein's controversial plea deal, has defended his actions. In September 2025 testimony to Congress, Acosta said taking Epstein to trial would have been a crapshoot, and that the plea deal was the best available option. Many disagree. Victims and their advocates argue that Acosta betrayed them and allowed a serial predator to continue his crimes. Will there ever be accountability for those decisions? And finally, the sixth question, what happens to the victims? Hundreds of women were abused by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Many were children when it happened. The trauma they experienced doesn't end with document releases or prison sentences. Will there be additional compensation funds? Will there be better victim support programs? Will the government ensure that future survivors of trafficking are treated with dignity and respect? These are the questions that matter most. Because this case was never really about Jeffrey Epstein, it was about the systems that enabled him, the institutions that protected him, and the culture that allowed powerful men to escape justice. So what happens next? First, congressional hearings will continue. The House Oversight Committee has announced it will hold multiple hearings throughout 2026 examining the Epstein case. Bill and Hillary Clinton have agreed to testify, though the date has not yet been set. Other individuals mentioned in the documents may also be subpoenaed to testify. These hearings will be closely watched. They could reveal new information and potentially lead to criminal referrals if witnesses provide false testimony or evidence of crimes emerges. Second, civil lawsuits by victims will proceed. Several survivors are pursuing civil claims against Epstein's estate, Ghislaine Maxwell, and others they allege enabled the abuse. These cases could result in significant financial settlements, and perhaps more importantly, additional evidence becoming public. One of the most prominent survivors, Virginia Giaffer, has been outspoken about her abuse. She previously settled a lawsuit against Prince Andrew for an undisclosed amount, reported to be as high as £12 million. She also settled with Epstein himself in 2009 for $500,000. But for many victims, financial settlements are not enough. They want truth, they want accountability. And they want to ensure this never happens again. Third, possible new releases of documents. Despite the DOJ's claim that this was the final release, pressure from Congress and the public may force additional disclosures. Grand jury materials, in particular, could contain crucial evidence. Florida passed a law in December 2025, allowing the unsealing of grand jury records related to Epstein's 2006 case. Those records could shed light on what prosecutors knew and why they chose not to prosecute. Fourth, the political impact. The Epstein files have already influenced political discussions in 2026. Several members of Congress who pushed for transparency have gained public support. Others who appeared in the documents have faced intense scrutiny. The case will likely remain a political issue for years to come, particularly as questions about institutional accountability continue to emerge. And finally, the broader cultural reckoning. The Epstein case has exposed how wealth and power can shield individuals from consequences. It has shown how institutions, from law enforcement to the media to academic institutions, can fail to protect the vulnerable. There is growing momentum for stronger laws against sex trafficking, better protections for victims, and reform of the criminal justice system to prevent future Epsteins from escaping accountability. But whether that momentum translates into real change remains to be seen. So here we are, more than 3.5 million pages of documents, thousands of videos, countless photographs. Years of investigations, and yet the most important question remains unanswered. Has justice truly been served? Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. But the systems that enabled their crimes for decades are still in place. The culture that protected powerful men at the expense of young girls still exists. And many of the people who may have known about, facilitated, or even participated in these crimes have never faced consequences. This documentary is not about conspiracy theories. It's not about unverified accusations or speculation. Everything you've heard today is based on official documents, court records, and credible reporting. But here's what we must acknowledge. The truth is complicated. Not everyone mentioned in these documents is guilty of crimes. Many people had innocent interactions with Epstein before his behavior was known. At the same time, there are legitimate unanswered questions. There are redacted names. There are withheld documents. There are victims who still haven't received justice. So what should you take away from all of this? First, listen to survivors. The women who came forward, often at great personal cost, are the heroes of this story. Their courage forced these documents into the light. Second, demand accountability. Not just from Epstein and Maxwell, but from the institutions that failed to stop them. Law enforcement, prosecutors, the prison system, the powerful individuals who may have turned a blind eye. Third, stay informed. The Epstein case is not over. Congressional hearings are coming. New lawsuits are being filed. More information may be released. And finally, ask questions. Question authority. Question power. Question any system that protects the wealthy and powerful while abandoning the vulnerable. Because if there's one lesson from the Jeffrey Epstein case, it's this. When we stop asking questions, when we accept the official story without scrutiny, when we allow secrecy to shield the powerful, that's when justice dies. The truth about Jeffrey Epstein may never be fully known, but the fight for transparency, for accountability, for justice, that fight continues. And it's a fight that matters not just for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, but for all of us. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary valuable, please like, share, and subscribe. Help ensure that this information reaches as many people as possible, because the truth deserves to be heard.